People say, welcome.
Hey, how are you doing, Stefan?
Fantastic. Tell me about, I've been to every province in China. I lived for 8 years there, and your list has places I had still never heard of when I lived there, but you somehow got to Aksai Chin last year. Tell us about it.
Yeah, Aksai Chin was somewhere. I didn't know if I would ever get there, but Aksai Chin is a remote area of China which is bordering on Kashmir. In fact, it used to be part of Kashmir, and that's why it's disputed because India still thinks it's theirs. And there is a mountain range which divides it. It's rightfully geographically it should be part of China, I think. But those guys have disputes. So I went with a guy, João Paulo Peixoto, many of you may know from Portugal, and he had organized a 2-week driving tour around Tibet, which was amazing. We were going to hit all the Nomad Mania regions of Tibet, and then we allowed 2 days up in the northwest corner to make a run at Aksai Chin. And so we were about, I don't know, four days into this trip, and we were far enough along. We kind of brought to the attention of our driver what our real intentions were, our guide, and then he told the driver, and we kind of eased him into it, and he started thinking about it. It's like, oh yeah, well, okay, we can give it a try, but there's a lot of security. It's a military area, and it's the area in between. It's just strategically located between Tibet and Xinjiang, which is the Muslim autonomous Uyghur territory. So it's not a place where tourists should normally go. We didn't have a permit, but we worked with our guide to try and figure out a way. And he did have a permit. We had organized to see a lake, to do quote unquote wildlife photography to the north of the furthest checkpoint that we knew of, coming to the north of Tibet. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't even know because it's not an official Chinese border, whether the border of Aksai Chin would have a police post or border post, because officially the real border between Tibet and Xinjiang is further north, right? But so we drove up there. We're very nervous and anxious, and went over one pass which was about 18,000 feet, in fact. So it's kind of an extreme area in the first place. And when we got to the border, there were a lot of soldiers. There was a post, a lot of soldiers with machine guns pointing them at us, and we had to pull over. And we were pretty despondent. We didn't think we were going to get through, especially because there was this big military convoy that we had been kind of playing tag with the whole way up there. And at that time, Kashmir was sort of on fire. I mean, if you remember last year, Kashmir, there's big lockdown and oppression going on. That was that time. It was in August, or was it August? Well, it was last end of last summer. And so it was not a good time to be up there. And it turns out the military had sent out someone from Beijing, and this was like the big inspection. And he had, it was a convoy of maybe 30 military vehicles, and they were like on their way right behind us. So we were not hopeful right then, but thank God for our guide and the fact that the guy at the border posts, I guess, who was in charge, came from the same village in Tibet. So our guide begged and said, we just want to see this one other lake that's just right over there. These guys have come all this way, and so the guy inside there said, okay, 5 minutes. I'll give you 5 minutes. And so we're in the car. João and I are like crying. The driver's outside smoking a cigarette, and then our guide comes tearing out of the building. He's like, go, 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 go. The guy drops his cigarette. We get in the car, and we're speeding down there, and made it across. And we're like jumping up and down, elated, taking photos, panoramic photos, and it was the very first time for the MTP app to actually have a live notification that you had crossed a border. And so
I was going to ask you about that because that's a key part of the blog post I just shared is the app. So talk about that app, the development you've done with the site and the app.
Sure. So I started MTP in 2005 after Guinness had said that they're not able to judge anything, and TCC at the time said they were not able to judge anything. So that's why I created a database of people and places. and the website. And the website, I worked on it till about 2010 when I had to go back to work, and then it kind of fell into, I would say disrepair, but the innovation was not at the same rate as it had been, let's say. And so I found a new developer in the last 3 years or so and completely rebuilt everything on the site and the back end. And it's much more robust now, and got some funding to continue that out, and also built an app. So we have an iPhone app, and then we're just about to release an Android app. In fact, I just, if anyone's interested, if you're an Android aficionado and you'd like to test, we have a version now that's suitable for testing. It's not available on the Google Play, but I'll forward the files, and you can download it, install it, and start testing. And then depending how that goes, we'll just release it on the Google Play. I anticipate, maybe even this week. So anyone, yeah, you can put my email. It's charles@mtp.travel. And just reach out, and we'll send you files. You can start testing the Android app. And it's the same functionality as the current iPhone app, which is geo-aware. You log in, it shows you all the things that are around you. It shows you directions how to get to those things nearby. And it's not just the countries and territories and divisions of land area. It's also the World Heritage Sites, top beaches and restaurants and hotels. There's a lot of stuff on there, and you can show as much or as little as you want in the different categories. It's pretty cool. The people who've been using it have given some good feedback and said that they like it.
Fantastic. And how do you pick the beaches and restaurants?
So for the restaurants, I started out with just Michelin 2 stars and above, and the reason for that was because of the numbers. There's just so many 1-star Michelins out there, kind of break the database, or you just crowd the screen. And then there's the 100 top 100. There's the top 50 that are chosen every year, but there's actually 100, so I include those, and that's chosen by the restaurant industry. So that's for restaurants. And the beaches, there are a couple of websites that track that, and they update annually. I forget offhand exactly which one I've been using. It's actually more than 100 right now, but we just call it top 100. And so I'm using other people's lists, basically. Mm-hmm. Like Golf Digest does the golf courses, and Scuba Travel.uk does the scuba and things like that. World Heritage Sites, one of the biggest challenges is because some of these sites have multiple children or multiple sites within a site, and some of them can be run into the dozens or even hundreds. Like the Roman walls, there are just hundreds of those locations. So, do you include them all? And then if you've been to one, have you been to all? Or, how do you deal with that from a computer science standpoint? So that was a really tricky problem. The way that we do it now is if you check any of the one child locations, you do count the full World Heritage Site, but we also leave the other boxes empty in case you want to do more of the children, right? So for example, Le Corbusier and also Frank Lloyd Wright now had a new WHS with like 10 different properties. They're all very different, so you might want to visit all of those, or you might just want to visit Falling Water in Pennsylvania to count it. So we give you the choice.
How about the Struve geodetic arc?
That was actually the test item that we used to try and prove out this concept. Yeah, those are interesting, and I went to a few of them, to check them out in Estonia and up at
Estonia. Yeah, I went to that one. It's like in somebody's backyard or something.
There are several. They're all through Belarus, and all the way up. The most northerly one I went was where Sweden and Finland come together, up at that land border. But yeah, they're there, and you don't need to visit all of them. If you want to get that WHS, you can visit one. But the app will tell you, hey, you seem to be at the Struve Geodetic Arc, whatever child name. Would you like to check in?
How much distance does it capture? So if you're within 50 miles, 100 miles, it's telling you, or?
Well, so they're different based on the different categories. It's just a set of parameters that you
Mhm.
program in. So for restaurants, for example, you're not going to do within 100 miles. And
Yeah, yeah.
people in New York City already complained to me that they're getting pinged from notifications that, turn your notifications off if you don't want to be notified, but they'll be getting pinged for hotels and restaurants and whatever else if you're in a high density
Mhm, mhm.
area of cool stuff. But so for the World Heritage, I think it's within a quarter of a mile if it's a point, and if it's a park type of thing, then it's within a mile. I think
Okay.
it's arbitrary. It's just something that's programmed in.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
And,
pinning
and
down
in
where,
restaurants, it's like 100 yards or something.
really pinning down where the UNESCO sites specifically are is something that seems to be a moving target. The UNESCO official site has these
Hmm.
maps, but they don't even handle the multi-site ones all that well in many cases.
No,
And
you're right. That's why there was kind of, and L Slots does a really cool World Heritage site herself, and she handles it. She doesn't include all of them. She handles some subset. It's a tricky problem. I was with another EPS friend over New Year's down in Brazil in Paraty, which has, it's the only World Heritage site that is both natural and cultural. And they
mm,
have 6 children. And so we were going around every day looking for, specific markers. And a couple of the natural ones were just in wilderness, right? So there is no place with a sign that you can take your photo next to, no real
mm,
marker. And the way that UNESCO did it was they just took kind of a center point of wilderness.
hmm.
We were like driving up all these dirt roads trying to get to what could be a marker, and no, there's nothing there.
Are the UNESCO sites a travel goal of yours?
Uh, if they're convenient, no, but not like other people. There are a lot of people out there that really are trying to maximize, and that's never been a thing for me.
Mm,
It's sort of if it's on the way. Same with scuba. I love to scuba, but I've never made a vacation out of just scuba. I mean, Cocos Island and Malpelo, those are absolutely amazing, and I was on a liveaboard for those, but that's kind of it. I've not been on a full scuba vacation. Uh, you do have to carve out the time because you can't fly, right after you've dived. So you do have to pay attention, but it's more of a generalist, if you will.
and those Michelin star restaurants, they're a personal interest of yours, or they're more the members' interest?
Yeah, like delicious, but I'm not trying to go to all of them. If they're
Okay.
convenient and I'm feeling wealthy at the time, I sign up. I do remember the first time I lived in Paris. The My time was coming to a close, and I don't know, 35 years old, I guess, and I realized that I hadn't been to any of these famous 3-star Michelin restaurants, and so
Mm.
I tried to start booking them kind of one after the other. And within a week, I had to go to the doctor because I was feeling really bad. And I went to the doctor, a French doctor, and he said, "Well, what have you been doing?" And I said, "Well, I went to Tour d'Argent, I went to this restaurant, the other restaurant." And he looks at me, he says, "Well, there's your problem. Here's this thing, it's called your gallbladder, and
Yeah.
basically it's full, and it's overflowing, and you're sick." And I saw the same doctor that evening. Went to like a very low key bistro. Doctor's in there with a glass of whiskey and a cigar. Like, hey,
Fantastic. You said feeling wealthy, and you've had incredible professional financial success and highs and lows. So, what is it like to be on paper very wealthy one day and very
yeah,
very changed the next?
it's well, easy come, easy go. That was year 2000, right when I started traveling. So the reason I got started was because I felt like I had a huge cushion at the time, and I left the company that I'd helped to start and which had gone public. So I was unaware when it crashed. I didn't know anything was kind of on the horizon. So that was a negative surprise. I was in Tasmania at the time, and
Hmm.
There's the times when you would go to an internet cafe to get
Hmm.
your news because no one had Wi-Fi. I thought I went and saw these headlines and I look up the stock price and I said, oh, I didn't know they were going to split this, split the
Oh,
stock.
geez.
Looks like they did a 4-to-1 split. It was no, it wasn't a 4-to-1 split. It lost 75% of its value overnight. So that was not a great day. It came back. It kept going down, and then it came back somewhat um, over the years. So it was enough, and I had set aside just a small bit, and that small bit was enough to last me for 10 years before I had to go back to work. So there was like a 6-month period where I was actually very wealthy, and aside from that, it's been the same sort of resourcefulness, just trying to do what you can with what you got.
What's the day? I think people maybe have experience of increasing wealth, maybe different levels through the course of their lifetime and their travel shifting. What does it feel like to be traveling where you feel like you're set for life, and then, as you said, needing to recalibrate to a different kind of resourcefulness as circumstances change?
Like, you know, I think that really, if you're really wealthy, then you just have all these different options of transport, right? You just say, oh, well, why not, charter a boat or charter a plane, or and then people can come along if they want to. But I'm just going to go
Mm-hmm.
ahead and do that.
Mm-hmm.
Then if you don't have, then you just have a more limited set of options in terms of transport. And then in terms of lodging, that really has to do with your taste and your style and whether you care about that. I mean, once you've stayed at a few luxury places, um, you sort of have, and you might be in the mood for it once in a while, but to just stay at those kind of places is you, you sort of get soft and coddled, and you're not really kind of experiencing the culture and what you're there to see. It's not as interesting. So, and I think maybe people go through a phase where they've never had that kind of luxury, and they want it, and then after a while they realize that it's not really bringing the benefits that it's cracked up to be, because certainly what's the best hotels in the world, that changes. It changes annually, if not more frequently than that, because management changes, properties close, just new properties are always built. I mean, like, what's the most luxurious property in the Maldives? Ask me 3 months from now, it's going to be a different answer. They're just building better, new and better ones all the time. So, maybe you don't want to go back to living in a hostel all the time if you don't have to. But there's, you know, there's some happy medium where there's deals to be had. I mean, I feel happiest when I found like a real gem of a hotel that's a super bargain, and you found a way to get in for $50 or something, and it's centrally located, and you meet some great people, and you have probably a better experience than if you were staying at the 5-star out in the outskirts of town.
I was thinking of a place like Zanzibar where you've got these old merchants' mansions in
Oh
right in
yeah,
the center of Stockholm for like 50, $100 a night. And
right. Or Marrakesh, right? You can stay in some old fabulous house, or you can stay in La Mamunia. You know, depends on a lot of different factors what you want to do.
so luxury travel wise, I see publications or interviews and they'll say like, oh, a celebrity or executive will say like, oh, I couldn't live without the concierge at XYZ hotel who does everything. And I've never asked a concierge anywhere for anything. I feel like they're just going to tell me to go to the Hard Rock Cafe. So am I totally wrong? Is there a place
No,
for?
you're definitely wrong about that, because a good concierge can tell what you want. I mean, it's part of it's your ability to communicate what you want, but if you say you don't want a touristic thing and you hate Hard Rock cafes, they're not going to advise you to go do that. The really good ones, they're good because they are able to communicate with many different people and fine tune their recommendations, based on their knowledge and experience. So yeah, you should utilize a concierge if there is one, and if they do a great job, you should probably tip him or her a little bit. because they can actually, they know a lot more than you do in that place. So you should.
Fantastic. And I recently learned that you made it to Nicobar, and it's actually possible for others as well. So this encapsulate what this quest was over how many years, how many attempts, and how you finally got your payoff.
Right. So first of all, Nicobars are an island group. There's a state of India called the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and they're two distinct island groups. And the Nicobars have been off limits. Andamans, you can just fly into Port Blair. It's actually some very nice vacation spots, touristic spots, and they have been for a long time. The Nicobars have been closed off since basically Indian independence. That's because they're militarily strategic, number one, because they're closer to Aceh in Indonesia and to Myanmar than they are to India. So they're very militarily significant. There's a big Navy base down at the bottom, but they also have all these native tribes, and the native tribes shouldn't be disturbed. It just happens that North Sentinel Island is in the Andamans. A lot of people mistake that, but still, there are closed islands in the Andamans, and then all of the Nicobars were closed. So they were I counted them separately as, on MTP. They were counted separately by the DXCC as well. I think by TCC, I forget, but they were off limits. So they were they were challenging. I tried really hard I was at Port Blair 3 different occasions. I spent days and days inside the bureaucracy there. Back in 2005, 2006, 2007. In 2007, I finally gave up. So I was seeing the same guys in the vice commandant and the vice president and all these bureaucrats, and it was maddening. It was like musical chairs. They'd go from one office to the other, and they'd say, "Oh yes, this is but you need to go get that approval and then that approval," and then they sent me back to Delhi. This one time, I spent all day in the interior office or whatever it was called. All day in these crowds of people, like it was like Dante's Inferno, 7th level. And then finally I got into this room with this older guy who was in charge of something. He was in charge of a lot of it, I guess. And he had a computer. He had like this very quiet big office and a desk that was completely clean, a computer on the desk that wasn't even plugged in. And, it's just me and him. And he asked, "What can I do for you?" I told him the whole story. And then the younger guy who had been kind of chaperoning me around before finally came in. And the older guy turns to the younger guy and says, "This man has kind eyes." And then he says, "Kind eyes, like John Travolta. Let's give him what he wants." I had no idea what he's talking about, but it's like, okay. So then they actually said I could go. This is 2007. So I flew back to Port Blair from Delhi with some kind of approval. And then they said, "Oh, well, no, now you need to go get local police approval and this and that." And I went and did all those things. Mm-hmm. And you can't make this stuff up. I'm with the police guy, and he's about to hand me the final permit so I can get on the helicopter the next morning. And as he's handing it across the table, some guy comes in and whispers in his ear, and then he reaches back and takes the thing away.
Oh, God.
And then he reaches over and grabs my passport and takes that away. And what had happened was that the days before, they had run this by the internal Indian FBI, mm-hmm. and it had come back from Delhi. We made sure about this. It came back from Delhi, all clear. We're approved. But right then at that moment, it had come from local division in Chennai. Do not let Mr. Veley go. Mm. And if he has started his travel, force him to, return. So the guy thought that this meant make him go back from Port Blair. And so he took my passport. And he's going to hold me until I got the next plane the next day. Oh, I said, "No, that's not what they mean." And then he made me write out a statement as to what I interpreted this thing meaning. And after
I come back after I go to Nicobar.
And after all that, and it had been 3 years, I just said, "I'm out. I'm done. I'm just done." And I never came back until this past year when Modi opened up the islands and said, or officially did, They're still not very supportive there, but a guy, Jerome, that many of you may know from Belgium, he's the first white guy or first foreigner to go through. Proved it could be done, and I was there a month later, just over a year ago. So happy. It was, and there are some stories from that trip, but just suffice to say that the majority of it was in the build up over many years, and it was mostly about the Indian bureaucracy. That was the biggest challenge.
Yeah. And I mean, you even managed to get your passport seized in Memphis, Tennessee, I think. So.
Oh yeah. So I got a new passport just before Christmas this past year. So we have there's a group called ETIC, which is Extreme Traveler International Conference. Mm-hmm. This year we had the meeting in Bogota in January, and so I thought, what a great chance to get a Venezuelan visa and finally go to Isla Margarita, which is the only TCC item that I haven't been to. So long ago, I completed the TCC list, but since then they added some things, and this is the only one I hadn't been to. So I went to get a Venezuelan visa. I had been trying throughout the fall different European countries to get the visa, and they won't support it for Americans unless you're resident in that country. So they suggested going to Ottawa or Mexico City, and it turned out to be true. So I flew to Ottawa and talked to them. We got everything set up. They gave me all the paperwork. So I flew back to New York and went and got a passport. Same day, it was like 23rd of December. They're about to shut down. So I got a new passport, second passport, U.S. passport, and then put everything together in a package and sent it via FedEx, and then flew back to San Francisco. And so I was checking on the FedEx tracker, and it said your package is in Memphis, waiting to be waiting to be transferred. Next day, your package is in Memphis, and next day, package is in Memphis. And I was emailing the Venezuelan people at the embassy in Ottawa, and they said, "Oh, FedEx doesn't deliver to us because of the barricade or the blockade that's going on." So turns out FedEx just confiscated it, and I felt really stupid because I had written on the FedEx, Venezuelan embassy, Ottawa. And I should have just put the woman's name and with the address, and maybe it would have gone through. But so they sent it back to me. I did get that passport back. Right now, that passport is with the Algerian government because the next one that I did was to get an Algerian visa because I was supposed to be with Harry Matsidis right now for 3 weeks in Algeria, which isn't happening. And so I was at the consulate in New York. You might not know, but in Algeria, there's DC, the embassy. And if you're not in the mid-Atlantic states, then it's New York. So even for a California person, it's New York. So I went to New York, dropped off that same passport since it wasn't going to be for Venezuela anymore. And they still have it. That application is somewhere. It's been 2 months now.
I'm thinking of all the points travelers that you know a bit about, and there was this Air France first class deal, fair deal, a few $100s out of Algiers a few weeks ago. They downgraded it to business class, but all these people were booking it like, oh, I'm just gonna get an e-visa for Algeria. It's like, good luck, guys.
No, Algeria is still a tough one, I think, but who knows where that is? It's been 2 months, and thank goodness I don't really need to use passports right now.
And Algeria is a large country that is very proud when it became the largest African country when Sudan split. It's got tremendous attractions. 3 weeks. What all were you planning to see? And I imagine this is it's certainly not your first visit, of course, but I don't know how many visits you've had in the intervening years.
Yeah, so I've been to Algeria twice. Once was just to go to Algiers, which was kind of the initial TCC young running around phase. And then later on, I went through Tindouf, which is the far south west corner of Algeria. And that was to go to the Sahrawi Republic. So all the encampments, the Sahrawi encampments are technically in Algeria on that side of the border. I was with a guy named Jorge Sanchez. We came from Barcelona on one of those Spanish, Spain basically abandoned the Sahrawis, and so they feel guilty. So they have a lot of aid sort of trips that they do down there. So we spent a week with the Sahrawi people coming from Barcelona, and then during that time we drove into across the border. Actually, spent the day driving into a UN base that's inside of the Sahrawi Republic. But so that was actually an Algerian trip for the most part, because there's like 100 or 200,000 Sahrawis living in that corner of Algeria. So Harry and I, Harry Matsidis, who runs Nomad Mania, we were going to spend about 3 weeks going to all the different Nomad Mania regions of Algeria and spending some time, World Heritage sites and whatever else there was to see. He was doing the organizing of it, and I was going to tag along.
Nomad Mania, I know you've talked about how you've embraced chasing that list as well. Are there any Nomad Mania divisions of countries that you're just like, oh, I just don't want to do that, but I probably will anyway?
Most of them, right? Harry started Nomad Mania with two things in mind. He didn't like the user interface as I stopped working as much on MTP around 2011, 2012 is when he started up. So he thought he could do something that was a little bit more user friendly, but also he doesn't like the islands, right? So Harry's not an island guy. And that we have a lot of islands because I incorporate the DXCC list, the ham radio list. And they exist right there. And if you go, there's a lot of wildlife. There's a lot of things going on. So you can't really ignore them. But Harry has the idea that the country should be divided up more into regions, and and it's fun. And I think he's right most of the time. But when you spent your time going through West Africa, right, and then you realize that you have to go, to the northern part of Togo, right? You got to go back and do everything again, then you question it. But most likely there's a good reason for all of these.
I love Central Asia, but the first time I looked at the list, I said, "Wow, that's a lot of Kazakhstan."
Yeah, no, it is. I went to all of them this past summer, and Kazakhstan's pretty flat. So there are some differences, but that's one where probably you don't feel them right away.
Cliff from San Antonio is asking about the ETIC, the Extreme Travel International Congress. How do you get involved with that?
Well, there's a guy, a friend of mine, many people would know. His name is Kolya Spuri, and he lives in Munich and some of the time in Monaco. So he's the one that started it, and the first one he had was in Munich. Myself and Jorge and some other German guys. Like Munko Runkel was there at the first one, and Harald, I forget his last name, but so it was a good showing on the very first one, and since then he's had it in Chechnya, in Mogadishu. He's had it in we did Lieberland. We met at Sealand. In fact, I don't count these places, but we've had some interesting meetings, and the most recently was in Bogota. And we hiked up into the mountains and went to the old FARC, where basically the FARC started. So the rebel mountain bases up in the mountains there. It was pretty miserable of a trip, but the parts in Bogota were pretty fun. It would have been fine, but it rained really hard when we got up there. So the entire trail turned to mud. We were sort of camping in the rain, not a lot of sleep, and just too old for that. But it was great. It's usually some of the most traveled people in the world getting together, and so it's like one of these sort of conventions and meetups where you're just glad to see everybody once a year. But to answer your question, to get in, you basically have to brown nose Kolya to get in.
And somebody named Lee that appears to be wearing a baseball hat keeps trolling you about your beard. Northern Togo is a dreamland. I think we'll have to put him on video so you can dish it.
I don't know Lee that wears a baseball cap. Probably one of these New York assholes, right? Is he coming on?
I'm sorry.
Is Lee coming on? I mean, I never known Lee to turn down a video.
Oh, I can put him on. Yeah, he's a big fellow. We can get him on.
Yeah, no, that's a,
Talk about birders because I've talked with you about
mhm.
these kind of trips that you're taking, these islands that Harry's not a big fan of. You end up with radio people, you end up with birders. The
No,
birders are a strange lot to me.
kind of the lesson is that there are people that are crazier than me and crazier than a lot of EPS folks, that really want to get to the remote islands and to watch. The birders want to go watch birds. They'll do whatever it takes to go check off these birds. I remember going to Ashmore Reef, Ashmore and Cartier Islands, which is a territory of Australia, nearer to Indonesia than to Australia. It's off the coast of Broome, so we sailed for a week out of Broome, and I remember these guys getting into a heated argument at night on the boat about this little brown finch that they had seen, and whether it was like a common finch or whether it was a super special Ashmore finch, that never had been discovered before. And these two guys were having a huge argument, and then the leader had to break it up. And I thought they might come to blows about it. It was this like little brown bird that didn't look special at all to me. So I think Kevin Hughes and I were on that trip together. We're the only sort of country counters at the time. We just sat drinking gin and tonics and watching the birders is sometimes more entertaining than watching the birds. And then the ham radio guys are also amazing. They organize these expeditions to go and live on a place for a week or two, set up an entire array of antennas, and then communicate with the rest of the world to bring that remote place on the air. So if you're lucky enough to get in with a group, they've already worked out the logistics and the transport, and so you can go and help them. Like I went to Banaba, which is a separate, used to be a separate territory under the British. It's part of Kiribati, but it's completely separate language and separate people. It's more like Nauru. It's kind of on the way to Nauru, if that excites you, right? It was a phosphorus mining island too, so it's like a little Nauru in between. We went and I, got there on the freighter transport, helped them for 24 hours setting up, and then came back the next day. And at night, so there were like 400 people squatting there who were trying to return to their homeland because they were all repatriated to Fiji, to Rombi Island in Fiji, back when the phosphorus company kind of kicked them out. So there were like 400 people there squatting in the old infrastructure there. Any of the single women, there were like a dozen single women. They all came over and cooked dinner for us to like kind of indicate that they were available. And we kind of sang around the campfire, and it was just a kind of a unique experience. And staying in a abandoned apartment building, camping out, just these things, they exist. So you can't really ignore the islands. They're there.
It says, yeah, you're in the right group when it's on the way to Nauru. So how many places have you, taken a 3-week or more journey to reach, where it's, I mean, maybe not like it's a 3-week journey to cover 8 or 10 places, but right. It's like this one is 3 weeks almost on its own.
Well, I think the longest one, I mean, the two that always stand out is Bouvet and Peter I, which you can imagine are two of the most difficult places in the world. Bouvet, we actually landed within 5 days. So coming out of Cape Town, it's basically 5 days to sail down there. We had 2 Norwegian guys on the ship. The Bouvet belongs to Norway. The 2 Norwegian guys were there to change the weather station, which was just like this little ball, machinery, and go on and tie it up. And then the South Africans had to bring a, holy.
What's up, man?
Oh, shit. Where's Hector?
He's sleeping.
Oh, okay. Good to see you. Just bringing up Bouvet. We landed within 5 days, and then basically, long story short, we 72 days on the boat, and stuck in ice for 2 of the weeks there. Yeah. So that's
my biggest nightmare.
Yeah, Lee doesn't like those either. Lee and Harry. Lee and Harry.
He'll go to Tristan.
What's funny is I met Harry in PSMO when we were supposed to take the boat to Tokelau, and bad guy, and he was running that boat. I forget the name of the actual boat, but it was a fucking disaster.
And then Harry did what? Did he go?
No, he didn't go.
He refused to get on the boat, right? Well, Harry's a good guy, but to each his own. And then Peter the First was, I think, 5 weeks. So it was 5 weeks, and we had to fly down to King George Island, then get on the boat, and then sail down, and then get the helicopter onto the land, and then finally got back after 5 weeks. And we were on King George Island on the way back. Hadn't seen a female in 5 weeks, and they actually have a commercial flight with DAP, and these two flight attendants were walking around, and we were like, "Oh my God!" Remember, it's like when you've been gone that long. Like I remember coming back to Cape Town after the Bouvet trip, and I was just like staring at an ATM. I put my card in. I'm like, "Oh my God, money comes out!" I can't believe it. Like, how did someone invent this? Kind of go in a little bit Wilson on the Tom Hanks Survivor thing.
Oh yeah, is Stefan still on the video, or is it just you and I? I only see you.
I see Stefan.
Yeah, I just made Carl bigger than you. I
didn't mean to crash your party, by the way, but I do appreciate the link.
Stefan's like the boring Minnesota guy. He just fades into the background, right?
Okay, talking about that way.
All right, man. I'll let you guys get back to it. I was just fucking with you.
I had never even heard of the Northwest Angle.
See you later, guys. Thanks, Stefan. Later, buddy.
All right, see you.
See ya.
All right. You mentioned Minnesota. So I grew up in Minnesota, not ever having heard of the Northwest Angle. And so until we became correspondents of Esoterica, I learned of it, then visited my parents last summer and drove all the way up and into Canada and then back into Minnesota. It was a fun, very quirky experience. Point Roberts you've talked about, which is near me in Washington State. So some of those of the quirkiest ones of MTP, what beyond the novelty factor, or which ones have the best novelty factor? I'll say.
Well, another thing about MTP is we do have a lot of enclaves and exclaves and quirky things that we just sort of added over the years, and some of them are. I'll be traveling with someone who bring it up, and I've never heard of it, but I'll look it up and say, Jesus, oh, that exists, okay. And that was the case for Northwest Angle. Which is a piece of land that's entirely it's in Canada, but due to geographic error by a surveyor long, long ago, it's included in the U.S. because it's up the top of the Lake of the Woods. They thought that was the source of the Mississippi at the time, and so the very far northwest was the border point. I'll just tell a quick story. I went there 2 summers ago. Kind of on the way, I was going up to Churchill, Manitoba, so drove from Winnipeg, and it happened to be the most buzzing weekend in all the year of Northwest Angle, which is called Northwest Angle Days, including the chili cook-off that they had.
You said buzzing. I thought you meant the mosquitoes. That's how I knew it was still Minnesota.
Well, actually, there was a massive rainstorm, so the whole morning was rained out, but then it kind of brightened up. So we just sat in the one bar drinking until it cleared up, and then rented a boat to try and go find that point, because someone said there is a buoy that's in the water that is the point of where the U.S. stops and the rest of it is Canada. So we went out and searching for that, and it was shallow water and covered with lily pads, and we were just going around in circles, and I had Google Maps up, and it was like we were within 10 feet. We just kind of kept going back and forth around the point, and then finally we saw this little orange buoy buried in the weeds. It wasn't very spectacular at all, but it was there. And I don't think anyone in this group or anyone that I've ever heard of has gone and found that. So Definitely got some photos and have documented that. The actual northwest angle point is a little sad buoy that's sitting up in the mouth of the river there. No, it's a cool spot. I mean, people go there to get away and to fish, and it's the extreme of Minnesota. Another one is Rockall, right? Rockall, landing on Rockall is crazy. It's a rock in the middle of the North Atlantic. It's about 75 feet tall with sheer sides. It's just there. And
is that the one you flung yourself onto the rock until you were blown off by the next wave, or
yes,
confused with another rock that you flung yourself onto?
Yeah, there've been a couple, but the Rockall is definitely the most difficult. It's hundreds and hundreds of miles away from anything else out in the North Atlantic. Just juts up there, and this guy was organizing a expedition. He called himself Island Man, and it's this Yorkshireman who walked around like a rooster. He's like cock of the walk, and so we were doing this like rock climbing training. So someone was going to go up and then rope us up, and then we got there, calm conditions, but the swell was like 3 to 4 meters, right? So you can't get close with that kind of swell, because if you miss, you drop down 12 feet and crash against the rock. So the captain was going to give up. And then he sent his son down. His son was like this really buff 20 something to go out in the launch and get closer to see if there's any possibility. And then his son's friend, who's this other buff guy, who was, get this, he's a surf instructor in Stornoway on the island of Harris, which is, cold. It's cold and rough. It's like the Outer Hebrides, and he's a surfing instructor. And so he jumps in with his surfboard and says, I just go have a wee paddle. Between the two of them, they go around and they say, we're going to have to swim for it. And so the two of them go first. They had wetsuits. And one guy climbed to the top. And so then they say, hey, Charles, you're next. And there were maybe 12 people on this trip. Only 6 of them actually landed, but I was the one that went next. And I had to use the surf instructor's wetsuit, because no one else had a wetsuit. So, what happened was, you go in the surf, and then when the wave comes crashing up, you basically, there's this one sort of crag, and there's a kelp skirt where the water line is. So kelp is stuck to the rock. You got to grab the kelp, pull yourself up, and then hook your hand over the crag, and then haul yourself up onto the rock in this little place where you can kind of stand up. So I did that, and stood up, and I'm going, yeah, and everyone's like, yeah, and this wave comes and goes, that knocked me off the rock. And I tried to get back up again, and it was just like, no, could not do it. Really exhausted after that, and went off. And by the way, David Langan is an Irish guy. He set the record for like the standard for what constitutes a landing, the bare minimum, because he went up and did the starfish against the side of the rock. He just went splat onto the rock, and he's holding on, and he was under his own power, full support for like at least 30 seconds, and the wave came and washed him away. And I said, that's it. That's the official bare minimum for what constitutes a landing, is the David Langan standard on rock.
Fantastic. David's a wonderful traveler, and
he's a good dude.
If you see him in Dublin, you might not imagine him in the setting of clinging to a rock in the North Atlantic. He's such a genteel in the best sense.
I was going to say
about FARC travels, your ETIC trip, the FARC regions.
Yeah, so we were in Bogota, and the point, Kolya likes to organize these ETICs around something dangerous or something, political. And FARC was born in the mountains. It's like a 10-hour drive south of Bogota. So they signed a peace treaty in 2016. They're now a political party. There are some factions which split off because they were pissed off they signed a peace treaty. So there are some people that are still fighting. they're mostly based in Venezuela now, so they're still pretty dangerous. However, the majority of the FARC are now peaceful and want to develop tourism. So this is the first and maybe only ever touristic event that they're going to have anytime soon. But they sort of rolled out the red carpet. We had like a 12, 13-hour drive to get there. We got there very late at night. And they had traditional dancing and, they had food. This is in a little village. And we slept on concrete floors and sleeping bags for that night. And then we had to take a Jeep an hour up to where the road got too thin for Jeeps, and then hike for 10 Ks up into the mountains and then camp up there. And that was the actual encampment where FARC, it's kind of a mythical place they call Marcatalia, where FARC was allegedly born. They have a helicopter shot down where they shot a helicopter down from there. And it's sort of like going to, I don't know, George Washington's birthplace or something for those folks. It was pretty miserable, actually, because it rained when we got up there, like very heavily. So we had to camp on wet ground. The trail completely turned to mud. The trail was very vertical, by the way. So that all turned to complete mud. And I couldn't make it back down. I was injured, but I made it down maybe a third of the way before I had to grab a horse. Thank God for that horse, or I think I'd still be up there if someone hadn't loaned me their horse.
And David is asking about Diego Garcia Biat. I know you've got the stamp, but what exactly is the place you have?
Yeah, so for Biat, basically I organized a trip with the help of a guy in the Maldives. So it was a resort owner that I first was talking about this, and he was very encouraging and helped line up a boat. And there were 4 of us that went. We sailed from the southernmost atoll of the Maldives, which is Gan. And it was myself, Jeff Shea, who maybe some of you know, Ben Fogel, who's a BBC presenter, who's pretty famous now, and a guy named Ted Cookson, who's a travel agent in Egypt, and a pretty well-known guy too. So the 4 of us went. This was like 2002 or 2003. And the key there was to have the communication with the governor, or the British governor of Biat, right, who's sitting in Diego Garcia alongside the Americans. So I contacted the Americans because I used to be in the military, in the U.S. military. And so I went through them, and they handed me off to the British governor. And then we had an email correspondence. So when we finally got there, he sent a patrol boat out to stamp our passports, which was brilliant because, like, who gets their passport stamped in Biat? And not only that, but the stamp says Diego Garcia on it. It has a little outline of the map of Diego Garcia. So, I haven't been to Diego Garcia, but I got a stamp. Just so people know, because I know a lot of people have tried to plan out expeditions and they have some troubles knowing where to go. The main atoll, which is the easiest and the closest to Maldives, is called the Solomon Atolls, Salomon, like the skis. Or the investment bank that used to be in existence. So that's the one you should go to. That had a village. There's a church there. There's a cemetery, and that's where most of the people who are sailing anchor for some time as they're on their way back and forth across the Indian Ocean.
Lily's asking about Aves Island.
Aves.
Yeah.
Is that Lily Echeverria?
Yep.
Yeah. Hey, Lily. Lily was at FARC too. So so Aves Island is Venezuelan, and it's in the very middle of the Caribbean, and you wouldn't even know it exists. It's so small. It's just basically a big sandbar. However, the Venezuelans have built like an 8-story building dormitory to house the Marines that they keep there, so that they show that they own it. That they want to retain the oil rights around there, maybe fishing rights. But so there are these Marines there. I think Lily actually had a better experience where they showed her around and had breakfast or like had this really nice time. And Lily's a charming South American herself, but not for me. I speak Spanish, but these guys were not friendly. And I think it's because we sailed from Guadeloupe and we were sort of hanging out there during the night. We arrived in the night and just hung out and didn't get on their communication channels. And so in the morning, just set out in a rowboat to land. And these Marines came out like stretching in the morning on the balcony. And they look over and they see someone invading their island. And so they got pissed. They came running down with their machine guns and confronted us. And they said, "Do you have an emergency? Do you have a medical emergency? Do you need food? Do you need water?" No, I just want to come say hi, and we walk around, take a few photos. Can we take a selfie together? And they're like, "No." they were not happy. So that was a very short visit. The Marines.
Yeah, I was just pulling it up to see, and I came upon a site called Zero to Cruising with the title "Do Not Run into This Island." So I can see. And you're trying to
and that's the thing is, with regards to MTP, these places exist. It's owned by Venezuela. It might be small, but it's different. So you should count it.
So talk about the MTP list. You made some, I think for the first time in several years, you made some changes after getting feedback in December. So talk about your process.
Right. So actually, the year before we made some changes also. So there were some years and only a trickle of changes. Prior to that, from 2008 to 2011, we had a very formal voting process where things would get nominated and then get voted on. And it got kind of out of control because all anyone wanted to do was divide up bigger countries that they had already been to into states. And so all of that was getting approved, and kind of the last straw was when Switzerland got divided up into all the cantons. However, places like Kazakhstan and DRC that are gigantic were not divided up, right? So, and it got just to be administratively cumbersome. So I just put a stop to it before it doubled in size just from these European countries. So it was on hold until they picked the development back up again. And the very first one, which was 2 New Years ago, we added the things that had been on the list before up for vote, and then and a handful of others. But this past Christmas, we added almost 50 places, and part of that was trying to make sure that those large countries get split up and to get recognized. And part of that's a nod to Harry and Nomad Mania because it's just so different. It seems inequitable to have Switzerland split up, and so we added Kazakhstan and Algeria, and I've said that I'm going to go through starting with the largest ones. So next is probably Sudan, and I forget which order they go in, but we're down. We've got the top 10 covered, and 11 and 12 and 13 we'll go in that direction when we make new changes.
Talk about the people that are competing most heavily to try to complete the MTP list or at least stay number one.
Yeah. So for most of the last 10 years or so, Don Parrish and Bob Boniface, 2 guys from Chicago, have been back and forth competing. Bob's a little bit older. Don's extremely thorough. Bob is more like, let's run around and just get it done quickly. So very different kind of philosophies. I know Don a lot better than I know Bob, but so kind of around 2009 or 2010, both of them passed me and had been kind of back and forth on top for that whole time. With this most recent edition of Kazakhstan, I had been to the parts of Kazakhstan, so just for the moment I'm on top, but it's not it won't last because either of those guys can just go and do that. And they've been to several difficult places that I can't do anytime soon. Don was down at the FARC ETIC also in January, and we talked about it, and people interviewed him and said, "Oh, how does it feel?" Blah blah blah, and he's like, "No, it's just like a pendulum, it goes back and forth, and it really isn't much of a big deal because everyone's travels are different. But what's nice is to have a list that gives you new ideas of places to go. You can't really say someone's number one or number two.
And you think someone will complete the full list at one point in time?
I seriously doubt it. I mean, there's some just really difficult places like Scott Island. I think maybe 3 people in all of history have landed on Scott Island. if anyone does it, it'll probably be Jerome, who the Belgian guy, who is really, really after these islands. He's super intense. He's the first guy that made it to Nicobar's. I was with him to land on all 4 Pitcairn Islands this past December. And not only, so we went, Ducie is the most remote of all the Pitcairn Islands. We made all the landings, but then within Ducie, he and our friend Terry Last, they had to land on all 5 of the little islets within Ducie.
Oh, wow.
So he's on a whole new level. He's on a whole different level. And when you ask him about some of these countries and land areas, he's like, well, that's easy. I can do those when I'm older, but these tough ones, I'm going to do all of them right now that I'm young and able.
Talk about that Pitcairn trip. I think, I have no idea what the current situation, but they had been planning to run it, I believe, in early 2021 to do a similar style.
June.
About 10 days to 12 days sailing time?
It's 2 weeks. It has to be within weeks because of the flights from Mangareva. Right? So the flights from Mangareva every Tuesday. So you can usually when you go to Pitcairn, it's 1 week. You get back and catch the next Tuesday flight. So it takes 2 weeks if everything goes well to do all 4. And actually, I had attempted to do that with the Bounty Bay, the same guys that Lee was referring to a while back when he popped on. And that boat was such crap. We sailed to Pitcairn, lost an engine, and then stayed on Pitcairn for 3 nights while they took the engines apart. Couldn't figure it out. So instead of going to all the other islands, which we were supposed to do, we just limped back to Mangareva on 1 engine. And I don't think we got money back, but it was just a 1 week Pitcairn trip instead of a 2 week 4 island trip. But we had a great success, and all those landings are very difficult, by the way. So the difference between other ones like Silver Sea, they won't land you, so they don't care. They won't land you on all of them. So these guys, in fact, didn't land on any. They'd all been in March on Silver Sea. So they'd come back on this one. The difference is that we have local Pitcairn guys as the Zodiac pilot and Zodiac scanner. So you need everything going your way, and you need that local knowledge. And if it weren't for them, we never would have made these landings. They're all pretty treacherous, actually.
And James is asking the most difficult visa you've had to obtain.
Okay. Yeah, I've had to get creative with a lot of visas over the years. And, maybe the most difficult at the time was Saudi Arabia. Most of my travel was done a while back, and everything's changed now. So anyone who's traveled the last 5 years knows that Saudi Arabia is difficult. Anyone who's just started now is saying, what's the problem? You just sign up and get it. But I must have visited, 10 different embassies, asking all kinds of different ways to get some kind of tourist visa, and couldn't do it. So I wound up getting lucky and getting a transit visa, and was able to stay in Jeddah for 24 hours. So that was kind of it at the time. Now, later on, when I went back to work, and we were doing business with the Saudi prince. So I learned what the haves and the have-nots in this area. We're doing business with the Saudi prince, and one day, we were going to go do a demonstration in Riyadh. And so one day he's just like, 5 of us, we're in New York, goes, oh, just give me your passports. We gathers all the passports, and 2 hours later, he hands back all of our passports. And inside is a visa from Saudi Arabia, 5 years, multiple entry. And it's I don't even think it said business. There was nothing referring to business. It was just this visa, and it came back in 2 hours. It was like, oh my God, it helps who you know, right?
Yeah. All my trips to that consulate in New York, and anytime I thought I was getting close, and they'd say, "Oh, we need to go pray now. Come back tomorrow." Like, can I just wait outside? And they're like, "No, it'll be a long prayer."
No, you should go pray. You should go pray too. Used to be Angola was, I think, what's Equatorial Guinea really difficult now for Americans?
Equatorial Guinea's fine for Americans, it's not for everybody else. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Angola was really, really tough back in the day. And that was one of the ones I was proud of, because I contacted the State Department. Usually I try to avoid the State Department at all costs, but I contacted the embassy and I said, here's what I'm trying to do. and you may not know, but it's kind of impossible to get a touristic visa. Do you have some staff there, it's Angolan, that would be willing to sponsor me? And so this kind of secretary, a really nice woman, emailed me and said, "Hey, my name is such and such, and I'd love to help you out." So I got the sponsor letter from her. I didn't know anyone in Angola, so you needed to have that, and that's how I got that visa.
Oh, fantastic. Eastern Ukraine. That's another trip that you took fairly recently that just had me fascinated. You leave little breadcrumbs on social media sometimes, but want the expansive story.
Well, so I don't always try to do the most dangerous thing. So sometimes it's discovering a little shortcut or an inside information. And so I looked at the Donbass region and found that Mariupol is it's a coastal town that's within the region. However, it's not being held by the Russians, basically. So it's been retaken by the Ukrainians, and it was very nice. It was very nice. I had a wonderful time there, and I could actually get a ride from an airport that was 3 or 4 hours away, and have a commercial flight. It was still sort of dangerous. There's a lot of troops around, and there were a lot of checkpoints. But it wasn't if you go to Donetsk or Luhansk, you have to go through Russia to get there. And I was going around Ukraine at the time, so I didn't want to have to go into Russia. It just wasn't part of my agenda. So that's how I got into the Donbass region, Mariupol.
And favorite Arctic or Antarctic or sub whatever, any of these places you've been to that are generally cold and icy, which are the ones that if somebody's going to try for one or two of them that you really think is the highlights?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you haven't been to Antarctica at all, then definitely get a peninsula tour, for a week or 10 days. But if you want to branch out, then definitely go through the Falklands and around South Georgia. Sometimes, they usually, if you're going to South Georgia, they'll go up to the Falklands first, because it's way out to the east. But South Georgia is one of the most beautiful islands in the world, and not to mention that it has like 3 million king penguins on it. It has all kinds of penguins, mostly king penguins. South Georgia and Crozet have the world's biggest penguin colonies on them. And South Georgia is where Shackleton finished his journey. It's where his grave is. It also has a huge history of the Falklands War. The Marines are based there. So and if you get out to South Georgia, then usually the ships will go through the South Sandwich as well, and then South Orkneys, and then South Shetlands. So you can grab a whole number of them, and they're all different. You see tons and tons of penguins, and watching them play from a distance on the icebergs there's nothing quite like it. They also smell better from a distance.
Favorite species of penguin?
You just gotta love the king penguins. They're so dapper. Rock hoppers look like little crazy scientists. They have these.
I love the rock hoppers. Yeah, I met a guy in Oregon recently who says he's a loosely affiliated group called the Penguineers, where their travel goal is to see all types of penguin in the world, and he had just finished that quest with the rock hoppers on Tristan.
Easiest way is to go to Cape Town and go down to Stonestown. We're at the Navy base there, and there's tons of penguins just hanging out. So that's the easiest way to first see penguins. But definitely expand your Antarctic Peninsula tour and go around the South Georgia way, and that's what I would advise.
And how about in the Arctic?
So I mean, the North Pole. I actually
broadly defined. It could be Arctic, it could be Greenland.
Personally, that's probably my weakest area. So I don't have as much experience in the Arctic, but to go on an icebreaker, you don't have many chances to go on an icebreaker in the Antarctic. You're not usually breaking ice, but to go to the North Pole and ride on the world's largest icebreaker, which these days is called the 50 Years of Victory. Quark organizes that, and there's nothing like being on an icebreaker when it's breaking ice. It's mesmerizing to watch these gigantic pieces of ice that are dozen feet thick, just piling up on each other. You know the feeling when you're in front of a fireplace and you just kind of stare at the flames, and it's mesmerizing. It's the same thing with the ice as you're breaking ice. You can just watch it for hours, and of course it's light 24 hours, so you can the show goes on as long as you want it to.
Fantastic. I see the fabulous Justine Kirby joined, and I'm hoping she's still listening and can come up with a trivia question that will stump you. So, Justine, if you've got one, there's so much miscellaneous travel.
If Justine is on, then I meant to say that all the New Zealand subantarctic islands are my favorites.
Talk about that for somebody that maybe has no concept of New Zealand subantarctic islands. What are we looking at? How do we do it?
So New Zealand, like Australia and France, and New Zealand has its own little slice of Antarctica that they claim. So in between that slice, their base is near McMurdo. Between there is a number of islands that they have to the south of the South Island, right? So you start with there's Stewart Island and the Snares, and then you have Auckland and Campbell Islands, and then you have Chatham off to the side, and you also have the Antipodes Islands, named because they're farthest away from the UK, on the opposite side of the world, and also the Inaccessible Islands. So there's quite a number of groups with remote sounding names, and beautiful seals and penguins, and just a lot of wildlife and scenery. And so the way to go there is you want to go with Rodney Russ's old company. Aaron Russ runs it now, called gosh, where am I spacing? But out of Christchurch, just look up the Russ family out of Christchurch, Heritage Expeditions, right? And you want to go with them. They go every year, a few times a year. It's very comfortable, and you'll get to some of the most remote islands in the world. They do go to McMurdo once a year too.
I'm thinking trivia. How many? You mentioned an Inaccessible Islands, the New Zealand subantarctic. There's also an accessible part of the Tristan group. So, how many islands in the world have duplicate names? There's 2 Christmas Islands. There's clearly 2 inaccessible. How many duplicates have you been to? And have you ever gone to the wrong one?
No, I do remember that when we were going to Biot, Ben Fogel, who's a BBC presenter, almost bought a ticket to Mali, to Bamako, to Mali in West Africa, instead of to Mali in the Maldives. That'd be a wrong turn.
I'm trying to think who I met was traveling to the Pyeongchang Olympics and somehow was able to book the wrong city for that.
Yeah.
I was going through Beijing wondering what on earth.
Yeah, pay attention at the airport. Know your airport codes for sure.
Yeah.
But maybe people don't know, but Christmas Island in Kiribati is not spelled that way. It's just the TI sound is like an S. So like Kiribati is Kiribati.
Yeah.
So Kirishimas is Kiritimati is the way it's spelled out, with a K. So it's not actually a duplicate, but
that's true.
Yeah, I don't really answer your question. How many duplicate islands? I'm sure there's quite
somebody's got the list of that.
The number of Scott Islands for sure, because like 23 people at MTP claim to have landed on Scott Island, and it's not the really difficult one near Antarctica for sure.
Michael Navin says 2 Cocos also.
That's right. Yep, Costa Rica and the Australia territory.
And Austin Fu.
That's why they put Keeling in parentheses so you can tell them apart. Right?
Austin Fu from Malaysia, who I met he was my roommate on the RMS. He says a lot of people book the wrong Christmas Island airport code wise, where they can be written the same way. And that
Austin Fu is like the trivia king, so whatever he says, I'll go with.
And he's got one of the best smiles in the world, so it was a pleasure to dine with him every night, and the sophistication of the RMS So you've got your impression skill. Let's close with the albatross story that I. So this is of the birders, the country collectors clashing and spending a few weeks together.
I would say they were clashing, but it was, like I said,
I should say mashup, not a negative connotation.
Sometimes it's more entertaining to watch the birders, as I said, than to watch, certainly than watching the birds. But this was this was actually Heritage Expeditions as well. Rodney Russ was leading the expedition. We went across the Indian Ocean to do the four TAF territories, so the French, Southern, and Antarctic lands, Crozet, Kerguelen, Amsterdam, St. Paul, as well as Heard. You can't land on McDonald because that's protected, but Heard and McDonald, we landed on Heard. So very, very unique and difficult, unprecedented voyage. I haven't heard of one since. And we sailed across, and it was mostly birders. And the pinnacle, or the high point for the birders was to see the Amsterdam albatross, right? Which all the albatrosses kind of look the same to me, but these guys would get up at 4 a.m. and go stand outside until dinner, whether it was raining or not. And so we finally got to Amsterdam. I made friends with these folks and kind of asked them every day, like, why, what are you doing? The same way people would ask us why we're doing what we're doing, but this is like another level. So we get to Amsterdam. We spent the whole day on the island. They all go hiking up into the hills and looking everywhere, and they come down. They're all disappointed, haven't seen the Amsterdam albatross. So we took the boat around before we sailed off towards Australia. We went back and forth in the shadow of the cliffs of Amsterdam Island, where we hoped they would see one until the sun went down. And this guy, kind of the leader of all the birders, he was the head of some Australian birding organization. His name was Phil, and always, because he had been outside, his hair was standing straight up. He was just a very animated guy. And he would, like, throughout the voyage, it was a month-long voyage, but he would always come, like, tearing through the dining hall and say, this bird is out here, and everyone would get up and run outside. So Phil, like, his top moment on this whole month was while we're going back and forth, and I see him running, like he's sprinting from one end to the other, and I was like, Phil, what is it? It's the albatross. I said, which kind, Phil? And he turns to me and he goes, Amsterdam. Like, you get some people even crazier than we are out there. Try the birders.
we need the Charles Veley Netflix stand-up special with all your impressions and stories. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll absolutely welcome you back for a part 2, 3, 4, 5. Every time you grow the list, we'll grow the videos. Thank you for joining us tonight, Charles.
We didn't cover. I look forward to seeing you again, and everyone out there. Great talking to you.